Booster is excited to support DIA Schools Collaborative on furthering the missions of our respective organizations through Follow to Lead podcast and other DIA programming. Visit choosebooster.com for details on Booster's school fundraising events, technology, and customized spirit gear. Booster can help your Catholic school meet and exceed its fundraising goals. Learn more today.
Welcome to Follow to Lead, where we discover how to listen for and follow God's call so that we might lead others to God. Our shared stories of inspiration from religious leaders and those active in the educational ministry of the church can help you know better how God is calling you and the role passionate Catholic education plays in spreading His message of faith, hope, and love. Now please welcome the hosts of Follow to Lead, Father Randy Sly and Kyle Pietrantonio.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Christ the teacher, teach us to listen. Teach us to do the deep listening to the sounds of our soul, waiting to hear your voice calling us to cast out deeper, to become fishers of men and women, shepherds of souls, to follow your will in order to lead others to the truth, beauty, and goodness only you can offer. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Well, welcome to Follow to Lead, a journey twice a month into the world of Catholic education, exploring what it means to follow God in order to lead others to Him. I'm Father Randy Sly, your host. And today we're continuing our 6-part series based on the presentation from 2005 by Archbishop Miller, then Secretary of the Congregation of Catholic Education, called The Holy See's Teaching on Catholic Schools. And in this series, we're focusing on the 5 essential marks of Catholic education as outlined in the document, hitchhiking on the 4 ecclesial marks of the Church from the Creed. Archbishop Miller identified 5 scholastic marks that make a school essentially Catholic. They are inspired by a supernatural vision, founded on a Christian anthropology, animated by communion and community, imbued by a Catholic worldview, and sustained by the witness of teaching. For those who would be interested in obtaining a copy of this document, we have a special edition that is available on our website at diaschools.org. And today, we're going to be discussing the 4th essential mark, imbued by a Catholic worldview. And to help us explore this very important topic, I'm joined by Chris Valdez, who is the principal of Marin Catholic in Kentfield, California. Chris is in his 31st year as an educator in the San Francisco Archdiocese and the 15th year as principal of Marin Catholic. He began his teaching career at Archbishop Riordan High School, which he is also a graduate, and then headed to Marin Catholic to serve in the administration. And since his move there, Chris has served in several capacities, including Dean of Students, Assistant Principal for Curriculum and Instruction, and an English teacher. Chris holds a bachelor's degree in English from the University of California in Santa Barbara, a secondary teaching credential from San Francisco State University, and a master's in Catholic educational leadership from the University of San Francisco. He currently serves as the president of the Marin County Athletic League Board of Managers. And Chris and his wife, Kathleen, live in San Francisco, and they have 2 adult children, Jesse and Georgia. So, Chris, welcome to the program.
Father Randy Slide, thank you very much for having me. I'm a big fan of your podcast, so it's really excited to be here. Thank you.
Well, this is really going to be, I think, an interesting subject for us to dig into. But before we do, I always want to give opportunity for our guests to share just a little bit about themselves. And so could you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your upbringing?
My upbringing. So I am a native son here of San Francisco, and so I was bred and born in the San Francisco Archdiocese. I attended public schools for my K-8 years. So I was a CCD kid in the after school program. So I was one of those kids who go into Holy Angels is where it was our parish when I was growing up, and I was fascinated by the differences in those classrooms versus where I was in the public school. Also, to the point of like opening those kids' desks and rummaging around through them, which is what CCT kids do, stealing pencils and that kind of thing. So I went to I did my first sacraments there. I also then made the jump to Catholic high school, as my sister did. She went to Mercy High School here in San Francisco. Then I followed up and went to Reardon High School. All along, sort of kept the faith well, and was active in campus ministry, active in my teen club at my parish, that kind of thing. But then certainly drifted for a while. Those college years were drifting years for me, and in some ways turning my back on the faith in some ways. Right. I was blessed to be hired at Reardon High School, even though I was underqualified, underprepared in some ways. But the principal there took a chance on me. I spent many years teaching there before I took the jump up to Marin Catholic, where I have found a vocation in administration, and certainly have found sort of what maybe you'd call a reversion to the faith. It certainly was clear to me that if I was going to be an effective principal, I needed to redouble my efforts to be a student of this faith, and that has come with all kinds of fruits, as you might imagine. And there's certainly many people along the road there at Marin Catholic that have informed and inspired that. Most especially Bishop Daly, who is a friend of the show. I know Tim Navoni, our president, and no doubt about this. The Dominican sisters at the school, Mary Mother of the Eucharist, have all inspired a kind of return to the Eucharist on our campus, and it's producing great things, and certainly in me a deep and abiding faith that I never had before. So I feel blessed to do that. Yeah.
That's great. Now it sounds a little bit like your entry into Catholic education was not necessarily following a calling at that point, but becoming a teacher, and then the calling kind of took place. Is that fair?
That's a good way to. I think a really good way to put it. Right. In fact, if there was a calling, and certainly the calling was always there, I couldn't hear it or see it, or I resisted it for a good long time, having been kind of formed outside of the faith for many years in college and in my own explorations. So yes, I think that's the right, Father.
Yeah, it's great to hear about your Dominican sisters. When I was president of St. Michael, we have Dominican sisters there too, from the same order, and I think I inherited some of your Marin sisters at St. Michael.
Excellent.
Yeah, that
transformative.
Wonderful additions to our teaching staff for sure. So you ended up in administration. Was this again something that you kind of aspired toward, or was that just kind of the school inviting you to kind of go deeper into leadership?
Yeah, I mean, in retrospect, I kind of look back and see that there was sort of a call to leadership all along. Having been team captains along the ways, retreat leaders in high school. All those things that sort of give you a sort of taste of what leadership is like. So I do feel like I had been given lots of opportunities for that. I was called up to Marin Catholic because a mentor of mine, a mentor teacher, and then a mentor administrator invited me to come. Right, it always starts with invitation. So I gave that to consideration. I started as dean of students, which is you go from being an English teacher where I was, and English teachers, as you kind of know, are among the sort of most liked teachers, right? They're in relationship because they really focus on story so much that draws people together. I went from there to the dean of students, where I'd walk down the halls and people would just scatter, right? They had nothing to do with it. So there was a temporariness to that work. I knew, because it doesn't feel good. There's not a lot of love quite often. But with time, you build up some thicker skin, right? And you start recognizing, you start going beyond the mind you have, right? And you start looking towards what the benefits of this are. How does that role contribute in the overall sort of functioning of a school? And so I learned to sort of embrace that, and undoubtedly that experience as dean of students really still continues to inform how I practice, how I relate with kids and parents, and all those kinds of things. And so, no, it was never a clear call to administration, but that invitation made a big difference. And then there was a lot of discernment. I mean, I spent the
Right.
first few days of that, first weeks, months of that call as dean, thinking like, when is this going to be over? Because this isn't for me, right? This is not. I'm getting back in the classroom as soon as I possibly can, and 20 years later, here I am.
It's interesting, though. I think being an administrator, especially now, that such writings like Archbishop Miller's paper really can play a big part in terms of helping to guide and form your leadership and administration in a school. As you look at Archbishop Miller's whole document on the Holy See's view of Catholic education, what are some of your basic impressions of the document and these 5 marks that we're looking at?
Well, so we've used this document as part of our faith formation and professional development with our staff, and so a lot of my impressions are based on that experience. First and foremost, it's clear and concise, as all excellent writing is. Right, it's very, very clear. It's very concise. It's broken down in an easily accessible way. It both guides, it directs, and it also inspires. Right, it's beautifully written. The quotes that come from Scripture or from from other church teachings, from the papal encyclicals, they're all beautiful. They all sort of inspire. And what was most gratifying as we were going through the 5 marks with our faculty and staff, which is a mixed faculty and staff, right? There's some there's hard practicing Catholics, and there's people searching and seeking. There's no doubt about that. It resonated with everybody, and it had something to say to every heart in the building. So for me, that's all I can ask for, right? That it's a way of sort of gathering together to kind of contemplate and discuss who we are and what we're trying to accomplish. So that concision is important. The other thing I really like about the 5 marks themselves is that individually they're very helpful in considering the various components of our school, but they also integrate and complement one another very importantly, right? If you're going to be an integrated community serving to integrate kids, the guiding principles and the guiding documents should be integrated as well. So I applaud it for that as well, that integration.
So today, what I really want to do is kind of dig into that 4th essential mark, which is imbued by a Catholic worldview. And in talking about a worldview, let's start with a good working definition. What do we mean by that term, worldview?
So, a worldview sort of maybe begins with the sort of lens that you're seeing, and this is right. I'll go right back to another essential mark, and that is the mark of Christian anthropology. The worldview has a sense of creation, the world that God created. It also has a sense of what the human person is and what it is called to, right? So the worldview is a lens and a way to sort of frame our enterprise. You can't do all things at one time, so you got to frame things, right? So it's a lens by which to frame. It's also, the Catholic worldview is also on what is being viewed in the end, right? And so the ultimate, the difference between a Catholic school and say just a public school is that what are we looking at, right? So how are we looking, and what are we looking at? And of course, for us, it's the source and summit, right? And so that's why our mission at Marin Catholic is lead students to Jesus Christ. That is the framing worldview by which we are doing our diligent work on a day-to-day basis.
I love your differentiation of those 2 points, because they are both really critical, aren't they? That it's how we look, but it's also what we look at. Yes. That a Catholic worldview would say, no, we don't look at this. So there's a sense of selectivity. Would that be a way of looking at it?
That's I think that's a really good way to put it. We talk in education, in general education, about producing lifelong learners. There's a worldview on that there's something good in being a lifelong learner, but it doesn't tell us what we're learning and why we're learning and to what end are we learning. It just talks about being a lifelong learner. So I think that's one of the distinctions is yes, the viewer and what is being viewed is vitally important.
And I'm going to pull some extracts out of this and have us kind of use those to orbit around our discussion. And one of the things that he said at the beginning of that section, he said, Catholicism should permeate not just the class period of catechism or religious education or the school's pastoral activities, but the entire curriculum. Thus, instruction should be authentically Catholic in content and methodology across the entire program of studies. Catholicism has a particular take on reality that should animate its schools. It is a comprehensive way of life to be enshrined in the school's curriculum. Now, these are a pretty overarching and lofty words. For you, what does this look like as a principle as you execute it in a school? What does it mean to have the entire curriculum being permeated by Catholicism?
Well, I think I'll start with this. Again, the notion of Christian anthropology, right? That who the human person is, and this entails that supernatural vision that we are made for a higher order. We are made for a relationship with God. We're made for transcendence, and so our kids have telos, right? And so we are going to develop a curriculum that's always going to go beyond the material. It's always going to go beyond the present day, which matters very much, but so is the eternal destiny of the child. I also think that word comprehensive is really important. We often I think one of the things that tells us that we actually have to steep ourselves from the very beginning of our enterprise, both in scripture and in tradition. We have to be keenly aware that there's a 2,000-year tradition here, and really it's longer than that, right? But there's a 2,000-year tradition of education at work here that we need to sort of tap into. And so we look at tradition, we look at scripture, and we of course look at church teachings, everything from the catechism to the encyclicals, again, to all of the wondrous scholarly works that have been produced over the ages. So it's important to remember that we have those at our fingertips, at our hands, at our disposal, in fact. And I say that it's important because there are also lots of other sort of movements in education, right, that are tempting, that are really kind of attending to the sort of here and now. What are we educating kids for right here, right today in 2023? And our goal is to be both and, right, to educate now. So we have to be concerned about the market. We have to be concerned about these trends and best practices that are sort of informing our students' lives outside of our classroom walls. But we always have to go to church teaching first. And so, and I say this because it's a temptation of many of our faculty members and my own to kind of look at best practices or trends in education that might seem good, but they have to be sort of measured against the structure of our Catholic identity and our Catholic belief system. And so I think that's a big challenge for us as educators today, making sure that these church practices are the beginnings of all of our design and redesign of curriculum.
Now, I think one stereotypical way that people could view this is a Catholic school then only reads Catholic books, only looks at Catholic literature. But as an English, with a background in English, as an English teacher, I would guess there are ways that we can use our Catholic lens on other writings. It's not a stereotypical, we're only going to read Catholic stuff. Would that be fair?
Absolutely. It is fair. We have gone through in our English department at Marin Catholic that question very much, right? Given our Catholic lens, given our Catholic worldview, what should we study and contemplate is really the question, right? What should we study and contemplate? It's not an easy question to answer by any means. And developing the criteria for how you choose texts, right? And again, in the common sort of contemporary approach, there's a heavy emphasis on representation. There's a heavy emphasis on diversity and those kinds of things. All have value, of course they do, right? There's no doubt about that. But that's, in my view, representation is sort of a second principle, not a first principle of how we go about choosing our text. If our mission is to lead students to Jesus Christ, which it is, then everything in the curriculum, everything that we do should be pointing towards him in some way. And yes, to use a very simplistic example or opposition, is that we can take a text that may have a counter view away from Catholicism, but what we always do is sort of bring it in, frame it in the gospel, and see how it holds up, right? That's a way to do it, right? So you can find that you can do a comparison and contrast Venn diagram kind of exercise in looking at these things that are outside the curriculum. One of the things we do, our senior level English class is anchored. All of our English classes are anchored in a parable and Jesus' storytelling. This is vitally important. So that's where our criteria selection begins. It begins in a parable, teaching of Christ, and the resonating teaching. Right, these are stories, of course, that everybody they're integral to our culture, and then also framed in essential questions. So our senior year class is the parable of the Good Samaritan. The parable of the prodigal son. Mm-hmm. And this is designed because students are they're on the threshold, right? They're about to head off into freedom land, right? They're about to go out there and exercise their freedom. And so one of the goals there is to look at maybe some of the potential pitfalls of that, right? Mm-hmm. And you can read lots of literature, lots of works about those pitfalls. They're abundant, they're everywhere, right? About how things go wrong. The essential question of that class, what does it mean to be free is it's a complex philosophical question. But it's one that students are hungry to explore. I've recently rewatched the movie The Graduate. I'm not sure if you're familiar with The Graduate.
Oh yes.
Dustin Hoffman's movie. And I just love that as I was thinking about these seniors that were about to graduate. That story begins. It's not a Catholic story, I wouldn't say. It certainly has Christian principles, and there's no doubt about it. It's still part of the age of Christendom in some ways, but it begins with that graduate kind of being on that platform. You remember that people mover, right? He really doesn't have control; he's just being moved along by the machine, by the system, and he is going through an existential crisis. The whole movie is an existential crisis, and it ends with this act of freedom, right? This movement towards sort of taking life in your own hands and moving forth, right? It ends in that chapel scene where Dustin Hoffman, the church is locked, he can't get in, symbolically important there, right? And he actually liberates the woman who's at the altar about to get married, his ex-girlfriend, and takes her away. And they seem to have this ultimate freedom. There's good music going, and they're running down the street on their own two legs, no longer being moved by the people mover. And then they get on that bus at the end, and the end is so good as Simon and Garfunkel come over, and they both have this look of joy to slow despair, right? Like they're right back in the existential crisis because they don't know what this freedom is for. They got it, but they don't know what to do with it, right? So I think that's an excellent maybe counter narrative. Well, it's a pro narrative, but it's sort of set up as a way from the church. That movie, I would say, largely, but there's so much to be learned there inside our church by what it produces. So that's an example of a non-Catholic text that really can inspire some interesting conversations about the fundamental principles of being made in his likeness and image and having this free will.
It's interesting when I think about that movie, there's this one scene where he dives into the pool with his snorkeling gear on and just stands at the bottom of the pool. And again, it's like, I'm surrounded and I don't know what to do. I'm totally helpless.
Right. Yeah.
And
talk about casting into the deep, right? Casting the deep without purpose, without guidance, without that vocational call is just drowning, right? That's what's going on in that scene.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then Archbishop Miller actually brings kind of a component of that in by saying that a Catholic school undertakes to educate the whole person, addressing the requirements of his or her natural and supernatural perfection. And so there is that sense of wholeness, that we have to look at everything that that person is about. What does that look like in real life and education, to look at the whole person?
Yeah, that's a good question. So certainly education is made up of at least three components in a school building. The first one is curricular. That is the content, skills, assessment, pedagogy inside the classroom. But equally important here, and this is really, really important to emphasize, is that there's a co-curricular program, right? That supports, complements, and does things that the classroom can't do, right? And the co-curricular, these are the requirements of the student experience. That entail retreats, for example, right? Every student at our school is required to go on retreat. It's not an extra. It is a vital and integrated part of their experience. Every student is required to do service, and that's again to complement the curriculum. If students are learning the corporal works of mercy inside their theology classes and elsewhere, they need to also go out and do it, right? They can't just talk about it. They can't just think about it. They got to go out and do it, right? And that's where the learning happens. Fact, right, is in the doing. And then there's the extracurricular program. That is the individual students making their unique choices about what else they are interested and want to take part in. And that's your athletic program, huge in Catholic schools, of course, the theater program, clubs, activities, student government, all those other things. They're all curricular, and they're all vitally important. So curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular. They all need to inform and complement one another. There is a huge movement has been around for a while now in education about experiential learning, and so we can learn a lot about what should be done inside the formal traditional classroom from what's going on in the informal or the outside classroom. I love to use football as an analogy, because what football does is one thing, it sets a really high standard. That's really important here. But you first learn by your coach telling you what to do, or and if we're talking about blocking and tackling, the fundamentals, he's going to tell you what to do first. Secondly, he's going to then bring a model of someone who knows how to do it really well for you to see and watch and then try to imitate. And then third, he's going to put you in the practice, and that means taking the things you've learned, taking the things you've seen, and doing them over and over again, right? The key to being a great blocker or tackler is repetition and practice. The beauty of football as well is that there is a built-in assessment at the end of the week too, right? You got to then go out and do it in a sort of high stakes, highly emotional, battle that matters to you, that has public view and all those kinds of things. So I think there's a lot to be learned from the extracurricular program of athletics. When it comes to the sort of formalized, when it comes to the formalized work of the classroom, we should actually be following all those components on a level, right? All of those components I just described should be also taking place in the classroom, the formal classroom itself. So when we're talking about experiential learning, we're always talking about both ends. We're talking about, you got to do the reps, right? And we know rote has a bad rap these days. We know that, but nobody's ever learned from not repeating things over and over and over and over again, right? So repetition is really, really vitally important, and the practice and the failing and the doing, but all those things that you would learn in practice also have to take place in those classrooms as well. So there's again reciprocal relationship. Things that are being done in the classroom should point towards what's going on in the extracurriculars and vice versa.
Yeah, and it permeates athletics. It also permeates the arts. I mean, you can't have a concert or a play or a final painting or something without going through the essentials, the rudiments, and to build those in. So in a sense,
you got to play those scales. You got to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is really a part of helping students to learn that every part of life is built out of these basics that are mastered and learned and then implemented in a greater way.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. So, take the language classroom then, for example, learning the foreign language, or when you say foreign language, or it's commonly said world languages these days, we're really just talking about a language that's non-native, right? That's not a language that is our own. So we're learning about other people. Language is a tool for connectivity and knowing, right? We know that, right? John's gospel tells us that the word made flesh, right? The language itself is a critical tool and a critical gift we have for connecting with one another. And when you're learning a foreign language, and we focus on Spanish and Italian in our school, one because there's so much. We're in California here, so there's a lot of Spanish speaking people.
Right.
There's a huge immigration population. We learned Italian because we're Catholic, and there's a lot of Italian descending people in our schools. So we do both of those. That language, language can be pretty rote and repetitious at the beginning, and in order to infuse life into it, it's important to sort of connect that language acquisition, to the parable of the Good Samaritan, for example. How ought I treat others, right? Who is my neighbor, and what does that mean, and what am I called to? What are my obligations to my neighbor there? That's what language really should be on some level. It has other values and other things as well, so don't get me wrong, but in terms of that Catholic identity and our Catholic mission, really connecting with others is one of those vital things that language does for us. So I always say, like, if you're really interested in social justice, right? If you really are worried about and concerned about the underserved or the poor, learn their language. There's nothing more respectful that you can do than to speak someone in their native tongue, and you can really develop a relationship really fast just with the effort to do so, right? So again, taking that formal curriculum of Spanish and really putting the gospel over it and see what happens. And I think, Father, this is an exercise you could do across the curriculum. If you have your language outcomes, for example, and you have your theology or gospel outcomes, and you put them together, you're going to find where the distortions happen, and then where you necessarily need to make some adjustments. If your approach to language is distorting the gospel, there's something wrong with it, right? And if the gospel is not illuminating your foreign language exercise and enterprise, there's something wrong there as well, right? And so coming to some alignment and some fullness there is really important.
Now, one of the things that Archbishop Miller did in this document is he added two subsets to the section. One was called The Search for Wisdom and Truth, and the other Faith, Culture, and Life. And in the search for wisdom and truth, it seems like he's really emphasizing that experiential side of what you're talking about. And he says Catholic schools do far more than convey information to passive students, which I think is a powerful image. They aspire to teach wisdom, habituating their students to desire learning so much that he or she will delight in becoming a self-learner. Now, this does sound a little bit ideological, and a little idealistic. How does this really work out in our daily culture in the Catholic school?
It's challenging, when parents are paying $25,000 a year for tuition, as they are at Marin Catholic. They want some practical results, right? So they are looking, practical meaning they want college acceptances, right? They want to see their kids have full opportunity, right? And so it is tempting always to regress to the practical, or to use a word we all use now, utilitarian practice, right? When we're much more than that. And so that is one tempting thing that we have to be considerate of. We always have to do both and, Father. As I said, we are, I love Bishop Barron's definition of that word metanoia, right? That penitential sort of consideration there, and that definition is to go beyond the mind you have, right? That's always the case, right? Why if you are if you really are interested in transformation of culture, for example, right, that you really need to be able to recognize and understand, again, that the practices that have been tried and tried and tried again don't necessarily, without the gospel, without a transcendent nature, they actually don't work. You just keep defaulting back to the material practice, right? And so, but we have the good news here, right? The good news is we have the good news, and we can do both, and we can set up kids for right ordered thinking, right ordered communication, right ordered problem solving, all of the things that are the problem solvers of our existence, framed in Catholic culture, so that kids can realize and understand that the things they are learning here are transferable to all aspects of their existence, all aspects of their life, all aspects of their work, and certainly all aspects of their relationship.
With that in mind, can you think, for example, when you have alumni coming back maybe to visit the school, do you see some validation of that in terms of students saying, boy, this school really set me up for being able to do this in my studies in college or whatever?
Yeah, we do. We get that regular. I don't know if it's just the kids who are celebrating the success that come back, because we hear a lot of that when kids come back.
Yeah.
Very few come back and wag their finger at us, ask for their money back. That doesn't happen. But we get regular feedback from students at all levels of the college level and of colleges, and all 98% of our kids will go on to 4-year schools. So we have a very blessed community in that way. Oh yeah, we get them coming back all the time, talking about how, first of all, they were very well prepared for college because they learned how to read, write, and think at our school.
Right.
And they will use those words. They learned how to read, write, and think, and they see themselves relative to their peers who may be very smart. And of course, that's not necessarily means you're well educated, right? But are maybe struggle or grasp a little bit. They will also say that the discipline they learned in terms of the organization, in terms of planning, in terms of turning things in on time, all those kinds of things are just boundlessly helpful. One of the things that I hear and I'm very proud of is that our kids really believe that they graduate with strong research skills, which is a little bit of a practice that has, I think, faded away. At least it faded away during my time. So we're returning back to that, recognizing that there are authorities beyond ourselves that may know things, that can teach us things, right? And we should know them, and we should cite them appropriately. All those kinds of things. And then and the biggest thing that we hear is that they miss our community, right? They miss that whole aspect of learning in community, where you're known, seen, and loved, and as the world gets bigger, it becomes less intimate. That's just the way it often goes. I will say, though, Father, on the other hand, I particularly during during the pandemic and post Rod, I was going to say Rodney King. That's showing my age there. The George Floyd incident, the George Floyd murder. There was a lot of activist movement, as you know, and I was hearing back at that time from many more students that expressed a disappointment that they weren't better trained and better sort of prepared for college life that really focuses on questions of diversity and inclusion and equity, right? So they're like this. Where is that in our curriculum? Is a question. It's a fair question. It was met at that time with a lot of angst and anxiety, but it's a real question that I think we need to be prepared to answer.
I think especially if you're looking at those things again through a Catholic worldview, there is not only a means of processing, but an approach that can be transferable, that they can take with them as they go on. Right. And as we look at that, and I think that's really a fair question, by the way, to look at, are we addressing some of these issues that they're going to face out in the world, the woke issues, cancel culture things, but to do it from a Catholic lens. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time thinking about this for certain. Yeah, I do think we are obligated to have a good response to that question. Well, why did we not cover this in school? And my first answer to that always is we did cover it. You just you're just not making the connections. That's really what the issue
Right.
is, right? So if you really believe, in social justice, you got to know where that comes from. It's not if you just look at social justice on its own, you're leaving out so much. You're leaving out the human person, so you're going to get it wrong, right? If it's again not framed properly. So that's the biggest question, right? But I also really so that tells me at school we need to make those connections better, right? Because when kids fall into the trends, or they jump on the train of whatever may be happening at the university, it's going to be powerful because it's new and it's being sort of communicated by really smart people, and it's of a culture, and so it's really attractive. One of the challenges then is, when we're asking the question about racial injustice, for example, and we say, well, we're going to the gospel as we are called to do, and we're going to look at the parable of the Good Samaritan again as a sort of guide for how we should respond to racial injustice. It clearly tells us what to do there. That is often not satisfactory. Kids, we're like, yeah, gospel, great, but people are dying and starving in the streets right now, and they're getting murdered. And what are we doing about that, right? Yeah. And so, one of the things that clearly has gone wrong there is that we have been very, that kid is really solid in the corporal works of mercy, as I mentioned before, but maybe really sort of undereducated in the notion of the spiritual works of mercy, and that they must go together. You can't separate them out and do them.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're just feeding the poor. You're just feeding the poor, right? The best way to feed the poor is turn the stones into bread, right? Just do that, right? Because right, you can. That's not what we do. We're made for much more than that. So we always have to put those things together. Of course, we're called to serve the poor. Of course, I mean, absolutely. That is absolutely what we're called to do. I need right thinking. Again, it's reading, writing, and thinking. People who are trained well. Who have a groundedness in who they are as a beloved child of God, to then go out and do the work. To go out to do it before you're ready, is to put that freshman on the varsity and have him get cracked over before he's really ready to kind of make a move. Yeah.
One of the other things that was going through my mind as you were just sharing is, in so many ways, when they enter into, say, college, in the university setting, a lot of times they're dealing with people that are arguing on the basis of sentimentality rather than, say, a philosophic understanding or, a more principled worldview or something like that. It's just coming out of their feelings. Are we equipping students to really deal with that kind of, where the worldview is really more on how I feel about something than rather how I think about it?
Well, not good enough. We're not. If we're doing it, certainly at Marin Catholic, we're certainly just emerging into that. We're answering the question, what hath Jerusalem to do with Athens, or what Athens has to do with Jerusalem. We need to integrate both the reason and the faith, of course we do, and that's been talked about for a good long time. Mm-hmm. The synthesis of those is just challenging all the time. We work in a compartmentalized environment, right? Schools have been compartmentalized for a good long time, and so it's easy to kind of separate things up. Science is science here, math is math over there, and English is over there. So, but the real learning comes when that integration, again, happens. And so, and we have to look for inroads in every discipline to actually make sure that we're attending to the overall mission. So, for example, in science, you are teaching kids methodology. It's all truth seeking. First of all, that's really important. Is that we need to understand that as we're developing, we say at Marin Catholic, we're developing poets, philosophers, and saints. We're ultimately saying what we're doing is we're trying to form truth seekers. That really is we number one, believe in objective truth, and number two, we know we're made to seek that objective truth. That's what we're doing. That's what we're called. Right. So in science, for example, it's it's really easy to go through a chemistry or a physics class and not mention Jesus, right? You can do that. Nobody will notice that
Right.
you
Yeah.
you failed there, right? But you shouldn't go through a science class and not talk about creation, right? That what we're called to be stewards of creation. Everybody believes that, by the way. At least we're stewards of nature. So to emphasize that notion of creation is really, really important in the science class, and recognizing that we are stewards of it. So everything that we are studying is a way of sort of inspiring this notion that if you do care about climate change, for example, which is a highly emotional and politicized thing, if you really do care about it, you got to hunker down and really know what you're talking about. You really need to learn. And again, we need to have curriculum designers who are steeped both in the truth of the gospel. That is, they're well formed and trained. As I said at the beginning of this, I had to go back to school and really become a student of the faith to really kind of understand what the heck I was doing. And I'm still on my way. I'm not there, but but we need teachers that are formed in the faith, but we also need people who are formed in the discipline, right? Because we don't want a distortion of the faith, and we don't want to lose the integrity of the discipline at the same time, right? That's really, really important. Again, so if the gospel tells us that the laws of physics are wrong, that's a bad reading of the gospels, right?
Exactly,
and if you have if you have the laws of physics saying that the gospel's incorrect, well, that's a wrong approach to physics as well. That's a misunderstanding. So we just have to kind of, again, reframe in a way that's going to sort of help us explore and understand that. So I do think that the muscle and the precision and the muscle and the precision of the curriculum is so really important. It has to be good. It has to be strong. It has to be accessible and real for kids to sort of understand, so they don't look at the greatness or the weakness of the gospel being held up in one class or another.
Yeah, that way there's not this compartmentalization where, there's theology and then there's science.
That's
and
right.
Never the twain shall meet, when both can inform the other, maybe not define the other, but inform the other. And it really does provide that synthesis that we're looking for.
I mean, two half truths don't make a whole truth, right? If you're just looking at half the truth, it is not true. It's only, it suggests truth, but it's not true. It's only when you put them together, right? Those two half truths, and you link them in perfect bond, that they become true, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In that section, the second subsection of this, Archbishop Miller makes a comment that to me is really pretty challenging, exciting to think about. It's something I could preach on, with great animation, but to live it out and to actually see it happen would be really amazing. And this is what he says. He says, a second principle governing all Catholic education from the apostolic age down to the present is the notion that the faithful should be engaged in transforming culture in the light of the gospel. Schools prepare students to relate the Catholic faith to their particular culture and to live that faith into practice. Wow, that's preaching material, but boy, living that out is really a challenge. What goes through your mind when you hear those words?
Well, the first thing I think of is that quote that's attributed to Pope Benedict. I'm not sure if it's actually correct, but this notion that you're made for greatness, not for comfort, right? That's a really big one, right? Because the utilitarian enterprise is not about transformation of culture. It's just about sort of maintaining sort of maybe an equilibrium, a material equilibrium, right? In terms of the distribution of goods and your own personal comfort and those kinds of things. But we're not made for that. We're called to an adventure, right? That we are not guaranteed there's not going to be suffering along the way. In fact, we're guaranteed that there will be suffering along the way, right? So that notion of comfort, which is so common now in the kind of utilitarian approach to education, is really it's a huge problem, right? It's a huge problem. So just to be, if you want to transform culture, you have to minimally begin that there's going to be some suffering and pain along the way, and you better get used to that, and you better strengthen yourself, mind, body, and soul in order to really be prepared for that, right? So yeah, I think this is, he uses the word, Archbishop Miller uses that word strong quite often throughout the text there, and I really think that's really important. In a culture that promises comfort, we're also promising that you're going to be weakened, right? That you're going to atrophy in your comfort if you're not exercising the muscles, and I mean all of them, all the full integrated human muscle, right? So that's super important, and something that our parents, when they're sending their kids to our schools, need to understand from the get-go, right? That we are not promising comfort here, right? And the cliches at this point about the hovering, helicopter parent, right? At Marin Catholic, we always say they're double Chinook parents, man. They're high-powered and
Yeah.
or the bulldozing parent.
Yes, exactly. Right? The lawnmower parents that are mowing everything down. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not a strengthening act, right? That's not a strengthening way for kids. I love the Jonathan Haidt book. I'm forgetting the name of it right now, but it opens with a piece of folk wisdom that I really love, and I repeat to parents all the time, and it just simply says, prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child, right? That's what we're doing. You're about to embark into a land, right? Again, threshold, right? You're about to head off into the freedom land. It's our job to ensure that those kids are ready, because the world is going to have its way with you if you're not ready. It will have its way with you, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. And when you were talking about exercising our faith and the challenges that we're going to face and the breaking down that society will do, it does remind me of again, bodybuilding is really destroying fiber that is then built up later. So there is that give and take that has to be there.
Right. Yeah.
Well, there's one last question that I've asked everybody, and that is, as you read through the document, is there an additional identifying mark that you think should be added to his list, or do you think it's pretty complete?
I wasn't, I've listened to this podcast. I wasn't prepared for that question. I'd say, I really, as I said at the beginning, I everything resonates here for me, and it does feel like a fully integrated a document. It really does cover both the tradition and the sort of zeitgeist, the spirit of the age that we're in right now. Father, I have to say, I haven't looked back at all of the marks in a while, but I really love that sustained by gospel witness piece at the end, and I think that I would only add to that piece that our back to that language remark that I made before. Learning how to communicate fully, tell your story is so extremely important. Everybody that graduates from Marin Catholic, I want them to be able to tell their faith story. I want a spiritual autobiography to sort of come out of them by the end of their 4 years here. What is their relationship with the faith? What have been the twists and turns along the road? But I think that's encapsulated. That's not an additional remark. It's just bringing all those things together. If they can tell their story in full witness, we've done our job.
Wow. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And boy, Chris Valdez, thank you so much for being with us today. This has been really fantastic. And if anybody wants to learn more about Marin Catholic, where can they go on the internet?
Right. So marincatholic.org is our website there. And I could always be reached at Steve Valdez at marincatholic.org, always looking to sort of extend and strengthen our network of people who are trying to do the good work. So I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I know you did a webinar for Duke and Altum recently on the English curriculum, which sounds pretty fascinating. So I think that they can find that on our DIA schools website as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So, we're really proud of that work. It's been really important work, and I didn't touch on that so much in this conversation, but that has been that work in the English redesign really has been transformational. There is what I've discovered through that process, and I alluded to it earlier, just in terms of developing text criteria and reworking our outcomes. I think I didn't quite understand how that transformative work in English was going to actually serve and penetrate the entire curriculum. And our theology teachers could not be happier, because they're saying we're no longer seeing kids coming in with this intention to just deconstruct the text, because that's not what we're doing in English, right? We're doing so much more exploratory work. So it's not just about skeptical, take this thing apart and put it back together, and that really serves their experience in theology in huge ways. And I could talk about other classes as well, but so to do this well across in subjects outside of theology really has hugely beneficial effects. And it may be more important to have excellence in your English department than it is in your theology department. That's controversial. I get a lot of trouble for that. But in terms of just practical movement forward of an institution closer to Jesus, man, it's been huge.
Well, and I think a lot of the worldview issues can rise or fall on the basis of texts chosen in the English department, I would guess.
That's right. Amen. Yeah. No, there's no doubt about it. Again, when your touchstone text, when the things that sort of bring your curriculum, bring your students together are the Gospels, and the parables specifically, but equally if it's the Odyssey. I mean, I just said twists and turns. Like if that's a reference point, well, then we're speaking the same language and we're kind of all on the same journey. It's true with Shakespeare. It's true with all the great literature of our time, done well, and it's true with the literature that's even maybe would be considered secondarily, if it's touchstone and done well. It draws a community together.
I hear a second podcast coming on. I think
okay.
I may need to get in touch with you and see if we could talk more about that. It is such an important area to talk about. Chris, again, thank you so much for being with us.
Father, thank you for having me. Thank you. God bless.
And for our audience, if you haven't done so already, please be sure to follow our podcast and to leave a comment to encourage us toward future programming. To learn more about the Duke and Altum Schools Collaborative, please visit our website at diaschools.org. And also, I want to thank our production assistant, Alex Shire, for assisting in the production of this podcast. May Almighty God bless you.
We'd like to thank you for joining us on this episode of Follow to Lead, a production of the Duke and Altum Schools Collaborative. To learn more about finding your own path in your journey of faith, or for more information on what we discussed in today's episode, you are invited to follow us on social media and visit us on the web at diaschools.org. To provide a one-time donation or monthly pledge, please visit our website. Your gift will aid us in providing up-to-date information, additional resources, and other support on how to take Catholic education to a higher level. We look forward to helping you follow God's call to lead others to God right here on Follow to Lead.